The following presentation of City Cinematheque is made possible, in part, by support from the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Norwegian Information Service in the United States. Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we're presenting the 1996 Norwegian film, Zero Kelvin, directed by Hans Petter Moland. This film won a number of awards around the world and is of a striking visual quality. What's it like as a story? Well, think about Joseph Conrad in Heart of Darkness. What if he hadn't gone to the Congo, but he'd gone to the Arctic instead? That's the kind of powerful story you're going to see. And I have to tell you, I have to give you a bit of warning. This is a film that is about hunters in the Arctic, and it is about men living in isolation. So the language is strong, and so are many of the images. To talk about not that, but many of the other features of the film, we'll have joining us today Richard Peña of the Film Society of Lincoln Center. Now, take this opportunity to go into what might be the heart of whiteness in the Arctic, Zero Kelvin. Hi, welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see I think, very, very strong film indeed, and a film that comes from a country we may not go out shopping for films from, Norway. But Norway is the kind of country, and this is the kind of film that can tell us a lot about the trends in international filmmaking from smaller countries. It's a pleasure to have back on City Cinematheque someone who spends a great deal of time seeing a lot of films from a lot of countries, and that's not going to surprise anybody when I say that that person is Richard Peña, Program Director of the Film Society of Lincoln Center and Professor of Film Studies at Columbia University. Always a pleasure to have you back, Richard.
Nice to be back, Jerry.
Great. Let's sort of start just with this notion of Norwegian versus Scandinavian film. To what degree is there a Norwegian, if I can call it that, cinema, and how does that relate to other Scandinavian cinemas?
Well, Norway, as I think you properly alluded in your comments, is in a certain way has been the distant cousin to both the Swedish and Danish cinemas, which have very old and very rich traditions. The Danish cinema, as you know, in the early part of the century was actually one of the powerhouses of Europe, with Asta Nielsen and people like that being among the major European stars. And a little bit later, the Swedish cinema, with Victor Sjöström and Moritz Stiller and other figures also becoming important. Right. And Norway was always a little bit caught in between there, and over the years, of course, the Danes have produced Carl Dreyer, the Swedes have produced Ingmar Bergman. There's never really been perhaps the Norwegian figure to kind of follow up along there. But one thing that's very curious about Norway is from a very early stage, something that they did, which is surprising it hasn't been followed as a model in other places, was from the very beginning, they began a policy whereby individual communities would own their own movie theaters. Okay. So that if, a town in Norway, the owner of the movie theaters, in however many there are, is the community itself. And there's actually a community board that decides which films will go in there and whatever. So this has, I think, led to an extraordinarily high level of film culture within that country, because in fact, it hasn't only been the whims and the dictates of the market or the latest thing coming down the pike from Hollywood. Certainly they get plenty of that, or they have opportunities to see that, but there's always been a very healthy set of alternatives in terms of what people can see. So you have a country which has had a steady production of cinema, which in the 90s, I think, has really begun to take off and attract quite a lot of attention.
Right. Now, if I'm a Norwegian filmmaker, I may have a market because I can trust that if I make a film of some quality and of some interest, all of these communities are going to want to see it. But I'm not so many people if I'm a Norwegian, and this is a labor and capital intensive art form. Even you're making a low budget movie, we're talking about $500,000 to several million dollars. And that can be difficult to recover in a small market. So there's two things that come out of this. How are production put together, and then what are the distribution expectations that come along with that kind of thing?
Well, there are a couple of ways. The Scandinavians, I think, have really been a model in many ways for the rest of Europe in terms of intra-regional kinds of co-productions. Zero Kelvin, for example, is a Norwegian-Swedish co-production, co-produced by Norsk Film, a very old Norwegian company, and Sandrews, one of the two Swedish majors. So you have a co-production right there, and obviously intros into both of those markets. The film also features the great Swedish actor Stellan Skarsgård, who in a wonderful role, an almost unrecognizable role in many ways. And so you find that in an awful lot of Scandinavian films, using actors from different countries. The languages are fairly similar. Norwegian and Danish are practically interchangeable. Norwegian, I think, something of a form of Old Danish in a way. Swedish is a little more separate, but even there, I think people very quickly learn to adapt, and I'm sure actors like Skarsgård speak all three languages quite fluently and can move from one film to another very rapidly and very easily.
Right. And the other thing is that these are countries that have always known they have to export. I mean, that is, they have to export not only within the Scandinavian region itself, but it's just an assumption. Not an assumption that they're ever going to control a market in the way of the United States, but an assumption that, you're going to get out there and you're going to get into art cinemas in France or in Italy or in the UK or in the Low Countries, that sort of thing. And that's it's a given. You're not going to make something without having that kind of plan in place. Now, it's also worth noting that this is a director who has come back, having essentially been raised in the United States, educated in the United States, made his first career as a maker of television commercials based in New York City, who then in 1985 chooses to go back, and this is his second feature film. His first was The Second or The Last Lieutenant. The Last Lieutenant. And now he should have a film coming out in the year 2000, Aberdeen, which is, again, an expansion of that, which is a Norwegian, Swedish, English co-production. So maybe we're getting a new regional cinema.
We're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah. But it's interesting to talk about somebody who would choose to go back to see his opportunities to make a particular kind of feature film, as well as to develop apparently this is based in his business as a maker of television commercials in Scandinavia as well. And
Well, it makes sense, though. I mean, you have someone as obviously highly talented and skilled as Hans-Peter Moller, and why sort of submit yourself to the Hollywood machine? I mean, you're going to be one of many thousands of skilled and talented people there, and in Norway, there are skilled and talented people, but you come with a certain kind of level, perhaps having worked abroad and things like that. Plus, there is a certain amount, a considerable amount, of state support for the cinema. Norway is a very prosperous country, thanks to North Sea oil. So because of that, there is money for culture and for cultural production. And the Norwegians have, I think, wisely figured that it's an important thing that there are Norwegian films for Norwegian audiences, so that they back those films. What's been important, I think, is that throughout Scandinavia, and perhaps nowhere more than Norway, I think people have taken this, not only as a right, but as a kind of privilege in a way. So because of that, I find, especially in Norwegian films, a very audience-friendly kind of attitude. Sometimes people hear the notion of state support and they think this just means people can do what they want and not think about audiences. I think precisely why the state's supporting is because they want films to find audiences. So in a way, it's led to, I think, Norwegian cinema scoring very, very well, especially in the last 10, 15 years at home itself. The figures for not only feature films, but even Norwegian documentaries are amazing when you see the level of attendance of Norwegian audiences at these films.
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting point about the way in which this becomes a two-way set of responsibilities. I mean, or it moves back and forth because it becomes a medium because of this relative prosperity, that the state has the resources to do it, but also it's a democratic country, so the state is elected and it's decided that the state wishes to do that for the people, that this is a medium they have chosen in a certain sense to have a very diverse national discourse that may deal with issues of national culture, and it can be in the documentary, it can be something topical, it can be something historical, an adaptation of a literary work, or it can be original contemporary scripts. But it's where, in a certain sense, Norwegians meet to discuss Norwegianness, in a certain kind of way, and that's that is one of the uses of all smaller cinemas, is this notion that cinema, whether we want it to be or not, almost always ends up being some kind of foundational narrative. People take it that way. They take it seriously enough that if it's identified with a nationality, then it's going to be identified in some sense with national identity or national characteristics. Some governments, that scares the heck out of them because that's why they want to control something, because people are going to identify the nation in wrong ways. And it's always pleasing to see a nation that's willing to engage in this kind of diverse dialogue between its creators, its state funding, and the public as well over these things. Well, let's shift gears a little bit, Richard, over to some of the traditions of Scandinavian film that this film fits into. I mean, this is not a one-shot deal of any kind. This is a film of significant visual beauty, but it's a particular kind of visual beauty. Where does that fit in the traditions of Scandinavian filmmaking?
Certainly, I think throughout Scandinavia, nowhere more in, say, Sweden, but I think really in all the countries, there's always been a tremendous tradition of what you might think of as landscape cinema, ways in which landscapes themselves become major characters, or even the major character in a film. And the interaction between humans and their natural environments might be the running theme of Scandinavian cinema for the past 100 years in many ways. Certainly, critics and scholars have written about that extensively. And in many ways, I think Zero Kelvin takes off from that, exploring especially the kind of remarkably beautiful but amazingly harsh northern part of Norway. Again, very much a kind of factor in people's lives, the kind of harshness of the beauty and the harshness at the same time that I think the film exploits very, very well. So certainly it seems to me another addition to that tendency in Scandinavian cinema. This time perhaps with a little bit of a different spin in terms of the way it brings together three very different individuals, sets them up somewhat in opposition in terms of, one being emotional and artistic and one being scientific and one being, some combination of the two of them, and the way they play off each other. And having such skilled actors, I think, of course, is a great boon to the film because it gives the kinds of debates that each of them are sort of initiating with the others a kind of wonderful sense of lived experience.
Yeah, one of the things that I find very impressive about the film is this slide in the film between the scenes that are outdoors and the way in the framing of the landscape and the way in which we can talk about this in a little bit more detail a little bit later, but the landscape is making different kinds of commentary as the seasons, as it were, change and as the movements change. But in addition to that, that movement from a film of astounding wide shots and framing of landscape, then into this chamber drama. I mean, we're inside this cabin so much, and one must give full credit to the director in terms of his handling of that interior space. I mean, this is a highly inventive. He knows where to put the camera to show you psychologically what you should be showing you, and at the same time, us never suspecting that we're in a theatrical kind of space. It really is a dynamized interior space.
There's a wonderful way, as you mentioned, that they flow into each other. I mean, you never get that sense of the sharp break between the interiors and the exteriors. They seem very much to flow into each other. You can almost feel the presence of that white nature all around, you know, these interior scenes.
Yeah. Also, one should just point out that it's not every cinematographer who can shoot under those conditions. If many of our viewers have, you know, sort of gone out in upstate New York or something like that with their 35mm camera on the wrong day, they know that, you know, there's all kinds of problems. So it's just to give some credit where credit is due, it's all the more remarkable that we have these kinds of visuals coming out of these kinds of conditions. Now, let's talk about the film more in terms of character and in terms of narrative. Because this is one of those films that, on the one hand, you can talk about it in terms of, you know, sort of universal things. Somebody going into the wilderness, being tested by a set of circumstances, and coming back. But I also think there are specific features of Norwegian and Scandinavian culture that are being dealt with as well. What do you think about that? I mean, I'll let you.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
I think that certainly, in a way, it's interesting because when people think of Scandinavian cinema, I think they'll often think, on the one hand, perhaps of these great landscape films, and on the other, the work of Dreyer and Bergman, the kind of, you know, two of the most spiritual directors, you know, in the history of the medium. In a way, the film seems to be a kind of interesting combination of the two, maybe between the interiors and the exteriors, because certainly the issue that I think comes out most strongly in terms of the interior scenes is the responsibility of this group to each other. Right. I mean, what is the responsibility of one person to each other? In which way can you use others for your own ends? In which way do the sort of needs of the group supersede individual needs? And it becomes, I think, an interesting meditation on that, ending up with that kind of very ambiguous courtroom scene, you know, that we get at the end, which actually questions what, you know, the level of responsibility of each of them might have been for each other. So in that way, I mean, it seems to fall alongside that, and these being societies which in various ways can be seen as kind of very socially progressive, and that there's certainly a lot of things that would be shocking in this country, like socialized medicine and, you know, much more of a kind of community-oriented feel. At the same time, here, I think, rather than a specifically spiritual dimension, it does take on that idea about what is our relationship, our responsibility for others.
Right. Well, one of the things that I find interesting is that it's a framed story. That we have the before, we have the set of motivations for going, and we have the after. And I think that initial set of just a couple of scenes is actually shot in a way to tell us a great deal about a pre-World War II Norway. We're talking about a Norway in this point that is certainly by world standards a prosperous country, but is nowhere near the level of consistent prosperity that we would associate it with today.
It's also a very isolated country. I mean, there's a wonderful scene when someone asks about Lenin, they said, oh, he actually died last year. You know, where, you know, in a sense, that idea of this country, which is on the one hand very European, but on the other hand really does feel itself kind of adrift or apart from a lot of the main lines of history at that point.
Well, and also this way in which I think we get contradictory features, just as you pointed out, of the progressiveness. That is, we have the young woman attracted to the man who's a poet. They're clearly involved in, you know, again, a sense of their freedom as 20th century young people to do this, to have, she doesn't have to be engaged to him, etc. Yet on the other hand, we have just it's not the hint, it's the explicitly of the hypocrisy of the society. With the two people he's trying to sell books to, he sells one book because he's selling pornography. The guy says, well, you know, if this is your poetry, then I'll you know, buy it because it's pornography. But then the others, we have that sense of the bourgeois society, of the utterly content society that would not accept him as a poet. Therefore, you know, he needs to make money, and so why is he going to go out and do this kind of thing? For the adventure, certainly because the girlfriend in a certain sense has rejected him as well, but also because of getting away from that society, because he's he plays the violin. He's a poet. He's liberated enough to believe in free love with his girlfriend, and so he can go out there, and obviously he has no idea what he's getting into.
And the reasons for him going are, I think, a little murky in a way, but it kind of makes it interesting because I think part of it's almost as if one feels there's a bit missing in much of what we do once he gets out to the great northern wilderness is trying to figure out exactly why he did go there. And in fact, I think he keeps making excuses and reasons to himself why in fact he's there. I mean, is it only for the money? Is it only for a sense of adventure? Is it to test himself in some way? And there are a lot of different things that come up, but it does remain, I think, fairly ambiguous, which I think is really to the film's credit.
Well, and I think that's very interesting because since the chief confrontation, while it's a triangle for a while with the mediator character in between, is his chief confrontation with the Stellan Skarsgård character, you've got two senses of ambiguities in each character because we have withheld information about exactly why the old hunter is out there. There's the, well, you've got to do this for the Greenland company. Well, why does he have to do it? What are they holding over his head? And why does this kid think that this is going to solve anything to play a violin in Greenland? And yet, to understand why they would be responding to one another, why there would be these psychological reversals, it would be much easier to understand that if you had an anchoring in both of them. But by having that floating in that, so then you're saying, well, are they going to make up this time or what? So as the battle goes on, it becomes, we know it's going to go on, and clearly, by the last third of the film, there's an enormous sense of inevitability about outcomes. But for that first two-thirds, it really keeps us guessing about a lot of things. We don't have sufficient information to really sort out what this is going to be in certain kinds of ways. Well, how do you think that this fits in? I promise we talk about this, that the landscape fits in with this, What's the landscape being used for?
Well, I think it's used in a couple of different ways. First of all, it makes just their being outside always a question of survival. I mean, it's obviously just to be there. Your first order of business has to be just how you can get from here to there or how long you can spend outside. So it just makes all their time together indoors that much more intense. Because in fact, outdoors, they're always just simply preoccupied with survival from moment to moment. I think that's one way it works. It also, I think, sets up a certain kind of harshness in terms of that the limit or the promise of this landscape is always death. That they live in a place where very easily death can happen, it can be made to look accidental, whatever. And I think that specter of death really hovers over the whole film. I mean, for example, when they sort of at one point send Stellan Skarsgård outside and close the door, I mean, you really say, what does this mean? I mean, are they condemning him to death?
Right.
Or, exactly what's happening? And these are obviously the kinds of concerns that don't happen in most circumstances, but because the landscape has that kind of, terrible harshness to it, one has to be aware of it every minute.
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely right on that count. The other thing that I think about this film is that it keeps going. It has in it little surprises. I mean, obviously, coming home and people are dressed up for Christmas is one little surprise. Right. But the other surprise, perhaps, is the fact that these are people who have gathered together here, and the Skarsgård character is one who has traveled broadly. And so the bringing in of other cultures into this, and this suggestion of, it's never quite clear is it shamanism, is it whatever, but this introduction of something that seems more than simply psychologically keen, it seems parapsychological in some way, is one of the ways in which this film seems to start breaking down a lot of the, it's not just the obvious features of a cabin, but even the worldview of our young protagonist. Because what can this guy know? All he can know is how to be vulgar. All he can know is to taunt. And yet, he seems to have sampled other cultures, and in a certain sense, in certain ways, he seems to be more worldly than our poet himself.
Well, certainly, I mean, Norwegians have been for centuries among the world's great sailors. So because of that, you know, the fact that suddenly this man reveals it, it is shocking in a way that he's been to India and he's had these experiences. Yet on the other hand, it makes perfect sense within that culture where many people spent their youths on ships as an alternative to, you know, eking out a life in Norway. Many of them would simply join either their own countries or many other countries' merchant marines.
Right. There's one issue that I think we also sort of need to just chat about just a little bit, because I think this is an issue that is probably troublesome to a lot of viewers of this of the film. And it's really quite simple. This is a film in which there is a lot of cruelty to animals. Now, it's something that is thematicized itself in the film. I mean, I think it's justified wholly in that way, because that's one of the central issues. No, you must do these things on these terms to survive in this place. Do not sentimentalize animals in this way. What do you make of that in terms of the overall form or structure of the film?
I think it is something that's a kind of concern that's difficult to gauge in a way, because, as you say, I mean, it makes perfect plot sense. I mean, these are hunters and trappers. I mean, this is what they do for a living. If you made a film about someone who worked in a slaughterhouse or something like that, well, you know, occasionally you're going to see scenes of animal slaughter. It's hard even to think of it as cruelty in a way. I mean, because this is simply what they're doing. They don't seem to want to make the animals suffer needlessly. This is just how they make a living. So in that way, you know, I think it is going to be difficult for certain sensibilities to, you know, sit through the film. But in a way, I mean, I think it is just, what's interesting is the way it becomes a kind of meeting point for these very different people. That in a certain way, all of them, whether it be the scientist or the poet or the kind of, you know, rough central Stellan Skarsgård figure, somehow the trapping becomes the place where all of them can work together.
Right. No, I think it's a very good explanation of that. And then also, that slides over into the way in which the film is interesting in terms of language as well, because there are extremes of language in the film that go from, you know, let's be honest, profanity and vulgarity of really the crudest and perhaps most offensive form over to not only the pretense to be a poetry, but to genuine poetry as well, with sort of the scientific discourse and rational discourse about what our motives are and all of this in between. And it's not so frequently that we get films that have a small set of characters trapped together whose moods, but also whose personalities bring so many forms of language, even if we're just reading subtitles. Because I'm making the bold assumption that your Norwegian is not at speed. Mine isn't. I'll be confessional, confessional about it. And that's, you know, I think that corresponds in some sense with the animal issue. That is, we see things that are as human as possible. We see degradations of human behavior, and then we see the issue of, if this is what we can do, what is this relationship with the animal world as well? So we get this variety of definitions of animality and humanity in the film, and that's mirrored in certain ways in the various kinds of language these characters end up using with one another, from the cruelest to the kindest, from the scientific to the shamanistic, from the shamanistic to the poetic, which is, you know, rather different from just staying, say, in one form, in one form of discourse.
But again, one of the things is that, you know, so often in chamber dramas, of course, there is a great concentration on language and its uses. Here, of course, in many ways, the language so often hides much more than it reveals.
Absolutely.
You know, that in many ways you begin to see language as just another form of defense that characters have against each other in a way. They hide behind scientific rationality, or the, you know, vulgar profanity hides a kind of fear and childishness. I mean, there's a way in which you always almost have to see through language.
Okay. Well, we're not going to be able to see through much more language on this show, because we've just come to the end of our allotted time today. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, please drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Let me give you that information again. Drop us a line to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Richard, always a pleasure to have you here, bringing in
Jerry.
astounding expertise on world cinemas, and we look forward to mining that again sometime.
Look forward to it too.
Great. And we look forward to you joining us again as we try to explore international cinema here on City Cinematheque. Thanks for joining us today. The preceding episode of City Cinematheque was made possible in part by support from the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Norwegian Information Service in the United States.